So my name's Tom Gillhespy, and I'm from the Fragile and Conflict Affected Settings practice at Itad, which is a monitoring evaluation specialist consultancy firm. And I've been working with Haseeb here from Bangladesh for the last year, looking at where conflict and the environmental issues can intersect. One of the things that we sort of noticed whilst working together is that, firstly, that the two sectors, conflict and environment, do not come together perhaps as frequently as they should do, but also that there's a number of tools that can be useful to helping us better integrate our professions. So we wanted to reflect on some of those today and have a discussion about some of our insights. So the purpose of this conversation really is just to link and present a working paper that has been put together. And that working paper looks at, firstly, why the issue of conflict and environment and climate crisis need to come together. Secondly, what kind of policies are moving us in that direction, looking at particularly the UK and Bangladesh. And then thirdly, what kind of tools are out there that can help us as conflict advisors to engage better and think better about the climate and ecological crisis, but also then how to help people in the environmental profession to better consider conflict dynamics. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Haseeb to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm Haseeb Md Irfanullah. I'm based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. I am basically an ecologist. I did my PhD in ecology from the University of Brooklyn. For the last 2 decades, I have been working in the sector biodiversity conservation, climate change adaptation. But over the last year or so, it has been a fascinating experience working with Tom and other colleagues, learning about how natural resource management, the way we handle it, the way we take care of it, is linked with conflict, stability, and security.
So with that, I'll turn to you just to give some reflections on how you think the climate and ecological challenges that Bangladesh faces do intersect with conflict, and what reflections you've had from working together.
When we talk about Bangladesh, obviously climate change come up in top of the list in the discussion point. And we see that Bangladesh has always been a climate vulnerable country. It has never left the top 10 positions all over the world. But it is not only that environmental aspects, climate change, as well as regional influence, but also how we are using the water and how it is influencing the quality as well as quantity of the water. For example, Bangladesh is a highly populous country, so the agricultural use of water, the industrialization that is happening now, Bangladesh is aiming for the upper middle income country over the next 10 years or so, in rapid urbanization. All are not only polluting the surface water, changing their quality, but also the over extraction of groundwater. It is also in place. But how does it link this water security or insecurity is linked with this instability? Well, there are quite a few aspects to that. Access to water can create conflict as the water is getting reduced due to drought and the salinity intrusion in the coastal region. There are certain issues, certain tension between the neighboring countries regarding regional water sharing. We can talk about the migration because of climate change and other push factors. So this is how, when we talk about water security, it is not only the water security that we see, but it is also affecting the potentially affecting the instability within the country, among the neighbors, and now as well as in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting to see just how many sort of challenges, ecological and climatic challenges, that Bangladesh is facing. And obviously these are expected to get worse as the climate change crisis takes hold. And we identified, as you say, a number of issues around water security that link to conflict and instability. And you see similar kind of patterns in other countries, in countries like Sudan, where there's lots of tensions over sort of depleted natural resources, whether it be water or grazing land and farmland. In Lake Chad, the drying out of Lake Chad has been linked to increases in extremism. So you see these patterns, but what we aren't seeing so much is this sort of coming together of conflict and environmental professions. And I think that needs to change as we go forward. And there are some tools and approaches that are useful. And there are an increasing number of policies as well that are coming through from the UK government, from Bangladesh government as well, which can be useful to help us guide that and bring these two sectors together. And one of the policies and strategies that we looked at for Bangladesh was the Delta Plan. And in that Delta Plan, it was a really extremely impressive, thorough report around the ecological concerns of the delta in water security in Bangladesh, and it did comment at some cases that there were some sort of low-level conflict that arose from water disputes, but it was really in passing. It didn't really consider conflict in any sort of particular way. There certainly wasn't a focus on the conflict risks. And I'm just wondering whether you think that's appropriate for a plan like that, or whether a plan like that could actually be more conflict sensitive, and if it can be more conflict sensitive, how do we get it to be more conflict sensitive?
Yeah, that's a very interesting example that you have brought in. Delta Plan, Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100 is a massive document, not because it's voluminous, but also before that has been put into preparing. It was out in 2018, and it's a kind of strategic planning document, what might be happening over the next 40 years or so. And it has outlined 80 different projects, but it has been criticized that it has focused more on gray solutions rather than considering the ecology of Bangladesh as a delta, which is an active delta. But I have gone through that, and Tom, you have already mentioned that ecosystem-based approach, conservation using the natural way of a river, those have been highlighted. Environmental sustainability has been highlighted. But the conflict issue, thinking of Bangladesh as a climate vulnerable country and natural resources are depleting, degrading. So when you have a 80 years long strategic document, you need to think of those issues and how that might be leading to conflict and instability. I think it's a kind of not a cultural thing, it's a kind of a country's understanding of conflict and stability. I think that might be one of the reasons. I have been working in natural resource management. Now I can see, working with you, that how conflict can be addressed, how our projects can be conflict sensitive. But we, as biodiversity conservation people, environmentalists, we don't see things through that conflict sensitivity lens.
And I've been reflecting on this a little bit, because one of the challenges is trying to understand how future events are going to affect conflict and stability. And a lot of conflict analyses will scenario plan. They will look to the future, but understandably, they don't want to try and predict the future. I mean, who wants to be given that task? But I think what a challenge is that a lot of those scenarios and a lot of the conflict analyses that we see being undertaken are sort of snapshots of what is the current context today, informed by what's happened in the past. And what they don't really do is take account for the fact that climate and the ecological crisis is going to have quite a dramatic change in the future. So I think one of the things that would be useful is for conflict analyses to get better at considering climatic and ecological changes in the future and thinking about how that can actually then affect the conflict dynamics. And I think that will help us all on both sides of the coin. And there's some interesting tools which we've included in the working paper that we've developed, which help us look through that. But before we get on to that, I think it'd be useful just to reflect on some of the policies that the UK has got in place and some of the reviews that it's been conducting. So for example, the National Security and Defence Review in 2015 and the UK's 2021 Integrated Review, they've all flagged the importance of climate and ecological crises to security risks that affect the UK. There are some that are within UK national borders, in the sense that flooding risks will increase as wildfire risks will increase within the UK. But then there's also recognition that climate and ecological crisis will exacerbate tensions overseas that could threaten UK interests. So conflict obviously being something that can be exacerbated by climate change and threats such as those. And part of the UK's response to that is to have more of a focus on nature-based solutions. And for me, this was a new concept as a sort of somebody working in the conflict environment, the conflict context. So I wonder whether you could just explain to us a little bit about nature-based solutions and how they might fit into this.
Yeah, yes, nature-based solution has become a kind of a new concept, but it is not a new thing. If you look into the definition or the principles that defines nature-based solutions, it's a kind of umbrella concept. In simple terms, nature-based solutions are the actions that we take to face societal challenges like climate change, like water security, water insecurity, health concerns, biodiversity degradation. You just name it. So when we sustainably manage an ecosystem, or try to restore it if it is degraded, or try to protect it to solve our problems or challenges, it is nature-based solution. So protecting a forest, restoring a woodland, managing our coastal environment, all are examples of nature-based solutions. But we need to remember, while doing that, two types of benefits must come out, not one. Not only human benefit, human well-being will be improved through nature-based solutions, but also biodiversity benefit or ecosystem benefit. That's the key point which make nature-based solutions stand out.
What I liked about the IUCN nature-based solutions framework is that it really highlights the essentiality of social change and social benefits. So it may not mention conflict directly, but it mentions that it should contribute in some way to good governance, or to improve livelihoods, or to well-being of communities. So those are the kind of issues that you would expect to see within a conflict and a conflict analysis. And so when you see that kind of opportunity to restore landscapes, and you think how many conflicts are either directly linked to natural resource pressures, or at least exacerbated by those, then to be able to restore landscapes in some of these contexts would be quite phenomenal. And the latest example is looking at a desert landscape in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the conflict work we do is in the Middle East. And again, if you can start to bring back some of the vegetation, increase grazing, increase access to fuel wood, but also rebalance and rejuvenate the water cycle. Again, these are really profound things that could have an impact. But as a conflict advisor, I'd find it hard to look at a conflict context and think, oh, there's an opportunity here for nature-based solutions. Even the local people that you're working with, this could have been land that's been degraded for generations, even centuries. So they themselves may not even recognise that there's an opportunity to regenerate their landscape. So I think that's one of the challenges, is raising awareness of both professions about how nature-based solutions can actually, what they are, what their potential is, and then helping them just with some basic tools to identify where there might be potential to apply them.
I can come in here. You have given a very fantastic example. And when you mentioned IUCN's framework, IUCN last year, they developed a global standard for nature-based solutions. And while working with you, I have gone through them. You are absolutely right. Conflict issue hasn't been come up there yet, but there are certain standards which I mean, criteria that would bring those issues in. Because when you talk about nature-based solution, it is, of course, you need to identify the problem, the challenge you want to address, how big the challenge is, whether it is economically feasible, whether it is giving biodiversity benefit. But governance is a very big issue in implementing, even designing a nature-based solution. You have to bring in the people who will be affected by nature-based solutions, like the one I just mentioned, that restoration, large-scale restoration. The other point they talk about is trade-off. Trade-off has come up in a big way because before nature-based solution, of course, that particular ecosystem or services have been used by some fraction of the community. But when you try to change it, who is going to lose what? So that the conflict doesn't arise. That's why you need to take those things into account. So the trade-off is so important, which has to be agreed upon by everybody. So there is another element. And of course, nature-based solution is such a thing that you can't say that my project ended, so the restoration benefit ended. No, it is a continuous process. So I often say that nature-based solution has gotten starting, but you can't say it has ended. The project ends, but not the nature-based solution. So adaptive management is also quite important based upon evidence, which Itad does brilliantly.
And that's something that's mentioned in the UK's Dasgupta report, is that we need to find new ways of measuring things and measuring success. And so that takes us on to our role as evaluators. What is it that we can be doing as evaluators, and how can we start to bring some of this thinking into our work, but also reflect on the programs that we're evaluating and see whether there are opportunities to increase the win-win situation that is presented by nature-based solutions. So one of the tools that we wanted to reflect on today is the IUCN framework. It's a very useful framework. It has a lot of criteria and indicators within it, which could be applied to restoration projects that are operating in fragile states. As you say, there are various social indicators related to that, and conflict isn't there as an indicator, but conflict is itself a manifestation of the social challenges that the framework does present around governance and livelihood opportunities, etc. So the other frame that I thought there's useful that we've come across is actually guidelines put together by the German Environment Agency. And these are guidelines for how you can make programs that are designed to adapt to climate change, but how you can make them conflict sensitive. And it asks questions like, how will climate change alter the political and economic and social and cultural context? So this is a great question for conflict analysis. It asks, are there tensions between groups that could be exacerbated because of climate change? How will climate change impact the key interests and resources and strategies of the interest groups? And how will climate change impact social patterns and institutional performance? So these are really interesting questions that could be fed into conflict analyses and help prepare conflict analyses, to get better at looking at the future of how climate and ecological change might affect programs that are designed today, but also just prepare the sector, the conflict advisors and the people that read the analyses to get them better prepped for identifying where nature-based solutions could come into it. There's also the Rome tool, which is from Restoration Opportunities Assessment Methodology, which I think is also from the IUCN and linked to forest landscape restoration. And there's quite an interesting table with just some, again, sort of prompting questions that could inform a conflict analysis, which look at, are communities aware that there's a restoration potential? Is there the political support to support restoration? Is there the ecological opportunity for restoration actually to benefit some of the challenges that the conflict is based around? So this was also a lens that I felt could be useful to apply, perhaps retrospectively, but also by looking at using as an assessment tool to identify where nature-based solutions and conflict may intersect, that actually enables, you know, the potential for a program.
Yeah, I think the examples that you have given, it is showing a fantastic fact that when we talk about conflict, it is not only about people, the society, isn't it? We are part of the ecology as well. So we need to think the social ecological system as a whole. When we see a particular ecosystem for the pressure, the shocks it gets from climate change, it depends upon the exposure it has, but it is located, the sensitivity it has, and the adaptive capacity it has. But it is not only the ecosystem is showing all these things, but our societies are also showing them. We are kind of similar in that sense.
So I think we've talked about the challenges of evaluating some of this work, and I think as evaluators, there are some things that we can be doing more. One is, you know, having more conversations like this with you know, that bring the different sectors together. Another is to do more research into tools and processes, and you know, there'll be many more out there that we haven't come across yet. And trying to bring those into our work and raising awareness that those tools exist. But also then looking at how we can bring in conflict sensitivity into the thinking of ecologists and environmentalists. So we talked about the example of the Delta Plan being put together without seeming to have much consideration for conflict. So is that because those people putting that together, that plan, didn't have the right conflict sensitivity, you know, skill sets and awareness and tools, so that there's a way that we can bring some of that conflict thinking into the environmental profession, but also thinking about the kind of modelling that a lot of climate and environmentalists are doing at the moment, and using some of the maps around climate change and environmental degradation to stress test current programs and policies. It may well be that a program being put into place today, 5 years' time, is not going to be relevant because climate change has rendered it unviable. So can we actually use some of those tools from the environmental sector to actually stress test and think through programs and policies that are coming out of the sort of conflict advisors and being used to address fragility. And I think just generally stopping seeing ecology and climate as add-ons to one or the other. We need it to get used to, you know, people like ourselves working closely together and that becoming quite natural. So it's a typical thing for an ecologist and the conflict advisors to start working together. And I think that's going to be really important as the UK puts its emphasis on nature-based solutions. And as we've seen in the working paper, there are those, you know, various tools and policies that are coming out of the UK that is pushing this agenda, which is great. But you're going to be pushing the agenda through teams who haven't worked together before, who aren't familiar with each other's language and tools and approaches and cultures. So finding ways that we can actually bring that together and have a really good integrated delivery between environmentalists and conflict advisors. And I think, you know, the nature-based solutions, the IUCN framework, these are all really good opportunities to bring people together.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I can't support it more. The way you are emphasizing on dealing two different, apparently they don't collaborate that often. And learning from each other, learning from other disciplines. I have seen that on many occasions. That actually benefit both, isn't it? That kind of opportunity. We have been discussing something that might have been taught by others, but not as strongly as we might need to see them. And we have discussed quite a few tools which could be quite useful for not only for the conflict advisors, but other sectors, as some of our examples have shown. That is much needed because the world is changing, the climate is changing, our society is changing. We need to kind of come together and learn from each other and create a new culture of working together. That is so important, and it should be start from awareness raising and having conversation dialogues like this one. And I'm sure who has been listening to this will join us and join the conversation as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So if anybody is watching this and would like to be in touch, then we would very much welcome extending this conversation to others and learning about the tools that you may be using and aware of that could be helpful to break down these barriers that Haseeb is referencing. Well, thank you, Haseeb. As always, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to speak with you.